Monsieur le Président, mes amis, je suis ici comme ancien client de la Coface. J'étais directeur du Trésor, secrétaire d'État et ministre des Finances du Mexique. Et dans cette fonction, j'ai beaucoup travaillé avec la Coface. Et pour tous les crédits export, il y a une ancienne histoire d'amour presque, des rapports économiques avec la France sur le métro, les Airbus et les groupes électrogènes aussi pour le développement de l'industrie électrique à Mexico, toujours avec l'appui de la Coface. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to open your annual seminar on country risk. Given current levels of uncertainty, it is quite a challenge to discuss the outlook for the global economy in the months to come. But let's take the plunge, share the OECD's assessment on the forces shaping the near-term outlook, the risks surrounding our projections, and the major policy challenges facing many OECD countries. Of course, I can't avoid mentioning the challenges of the euro area as we celebrate a bittersweet 10th anniversary of the euro. Now, when we published our latest OECD economic outlook in November, the global economic prospects were already rather gloomy. At that time, we presented a scenario where OECD output was projected to grow by around 1.6% in 2012. 2.3% in 2013. So 1.6% 2012, 2.3% in 2013. This is for the OECD. Monsieur le Président has just mentioned the averages for the world economy and all that. And of course, we are favored enormously by the fact that a few of the large emerging are doing rather well, or at least are slowing down to 9%, which doesn't provoke a lot of concerns for them. So, but the averages, again, like any other average, do not tell the whole story. We're talking here about the OECD effectively in a very, very slow mode. This scenario represented a significant downward revision from our previous projections and was predicated on the absence of disorderly sovereign defaults, systemic bank failures, and excessive fiscal tightening in the United States. That means the absence of disorderly sovereign defaults, systemic bank failures, and excessive fiscal tightening. Now, this is what I said when I made those projections. That night, MF Global went bankrupt. And the day after, there was an announcement of the Greek referendum. So this, I quote again, disorderly sovereign defaults or big accidents, systemic bank failures, those were the assumptions that would hold those projections. Well, both were blown out of the water in 48 hours after we made the announcement. Just to give you an idea of the volatility, of the vulnerability, and of course, of how delicate, fragile the whole situation is. We said also that there should not be excessive fiscal tightening in the US. There, if anything, we probably, because of the automaticity of the formulae that have been approved in absence of a political agreement on what to do about that, is producing perhaps excessive fiscal tightening, which is a paradox, because you cannot graduate enough the speed and also the sectors in which the tightening is going to take place. Mechanically, this thing takes place and then it cuts across rather than being able to do a little bit of more careful surgery. But again, it's because of the lack of decisions which Monsieur le Président alluded to a moment ago. Since then, the global economic environment has deteriorated further. Activity has lost impetus, even the large emerging market economies outside the OECD area. Unemployment has edged up from already high levels in some countries, and financial market tensions have persisted. The euro area already appears to be in recession. Of course, if we add this question about the downgrades of last Friday, that it creates something pretty close to the perfect storm. Because the uncertainty around our projections was particularly large, we did consider what we called a bleaker alternative. The darker scenario could be triggered by different events, a worsening in the financial banking system, which, as I said, happened, further contagion in euro area, sovereign debt markets, which, as I said, happened, and tight fiscal policy in the United States, which, as I said, actually happened for the wrong reasons, perhaps. The bottom line is, in a situation of great uncertainty, it all comes back now to policy action to restore confidence. Prospects could be significantly brighter if measures were taken to address the euro area sovereign debt and banking crisis in a credible medium-term fiscal program were enacted in the United States. As the economists put it, we could have multiple equilibria for the global economy, and appropriate policies could trigger a move from a bad equilibrium and certainly a bad mood to a good one. 10 years after the launch of the common currency, the euro is facing its most severe test. Confidence in the monetary union is being shaken by lingering sovereign debt and banking crises. The European leaders have announced measures to stem contagion, strengthen the banking system, and overhaul the governance of the euro area, as well as strengthening fiscal discipline in the years to come. The fiscal compact was announced at the Leaders' Summit in December. There are important measures to restore the confidence needed to achieve our upside scenario. They will need to be implemented swiftly and decisively. But there are also deeper underlying causes to the euro area crisis. They need to be addressed. Structural reforms to rebalance growth and restore competitiveness. They need to be put in place as a matter of urgency. Indeed, this is the crux of the matter. And the absence of these types of policies and measures are the ones who have helped unravel every single short-term measure and every single short-term package that has been put in place. There was no medium and long-term perspective to the short-term remedies that were proposed. To be more specific, the peripheral economies have lost competitiveness over the years because of a gradual increase in the cost of labor and weak productivity growth. Their external positions and public finances have deteriorated sharply as a result. By contrast, other countries in the euro area have gained competitiveness on the back of solid productivity gains and relied on external drivers to grow. Now, given the structural underpinnings of the euro area crisis, should not be a surprise that structural reforms tailored to specific country conditions lie at the core of the long-term resolution of the euro area woes. Countries will have to rebalance their engines of growth, and this can only be achieved by removing structural rigidities within individual countries, in labor and product markets, for example, that hold back competitiveness and growth. For example, reforms to liberalize sectors such as retail or professional services, which are often sheltered from competition, could contribute to rebalancing by unleashing opportunities for investment in those countries with large external surpluses. Likewise, labor and product market reform could foster productivity growth in those countries that have lost competitiveness and accumulated large external imbalances. Pro-growth reform also facilitates fiscal consolidation in countries with weak public finances. This is because faster growth generates revenue to the budget and is accompanied by lower spending on some programs, including unemployment insurance. To be clear, ambitious, medium-term fiscal consolidation will be necessary given the level of indebtedness of some euro area countries. And indeed, we've already begun seeing steps in this direction by many countries. Italy and Spain is a case in point. But it is an imperative to design adjustment packages that are, as the cliche goes today, more growth-friendly, not only austerity-based. This can be done with a proper mix of expenditure and revenue measures. On the expenditure side, for instance, higher public sector efficiency could allow for maintaining or even increasing outputs while reducing expenditure. There are also all these questions called the tax expenses, exemptions, exceptions, privileges that were built over decades and that need to be looked at today. In the case of the US, they are as high as perhaps 10% of GDP, maybe 1.5 trillion as part of a 15 trillion economy. On the revenue side, broadening here, it was la niche fiscale. No, it says 75 billion as far as I know. 10 billion were identified to disappear. Well, there's 65 others that are still around. That's before you start cutting expenses and raising revenue. On the revenue side, broadening tax bases by reducing these tax expenditures would enable a reduction. It's paradoxical. We're looking at how to increase revenues. And if you reduce tax expenses, you could even afford a reduction in marginal tax rates and the associated economic distortions. Improving the effectiveness in tax collection and the fight against tax evasion are other promising avenues. Here, France, with Germany, with the OECD, I think we can be proud of the job done, because this question against the fiscal paradises and tax havens, that I think has made more progress in the last 2 years, 3 years, than in the 12 years before that. And here I have to say the French authorities are particularly in the lead. Now, even if revenue neutral, tax reforms can also contribute indirectly to fiscal consolidation through their medium-term effects on income, productivity, and tax receipts. In addition, policies to tax public bads, such as pollution, could help consolidation while creating opportunities for growth. Rather than subsidize the so-called public goods that change every day, we know the enemy. We know, carbon is the enemy, so we can tax carbon, produce interesting revenues, help the environment, etc., etc. Green taxation is appropriate. Now, people will say that's a luxury we cannot afford. On the other, totally to the contrary, this is the right moment to do that. But there's also, of course, what I call the original sin, this contamination of the debt issue and the debt discussion, where 2 years ago or more, somebody said, and then there was an echo about this with many authorities in Europe that said, if they use the euro, they can't default. And it took us 2 years. We still have not operated the final solution to the Greek debt problem, which is now in doubt, by the way. And the contagion, the impact, the Ebola that this has produced in the world economy is now 20, 30, 40, 50 times the totality of the Greek debt. Just outright misconception. From the very beginning, we should have isolated, dealt with Greece, and the contagion issue would have been much less. We paid very, very dearly for saying if it's the euro, it's a virgin. Was not the case then, not the case now. I think we just mishandled that one, and we paid very, very dearly for that. It was an obvious case of an over-indebted, lack of transparency in the numbers. It was not tenable, and the markets recognized that as